Robert, I was wondering if we could start by you introducing yourself a bit, talking about yourself, your interests.
I began life in church, Presbyterian, and then in my teens I decided I didn't know if I believed all that and didn't know why I should believe all that, and went on my own search. And I came to the conclusion, which I still think is true, that there was compelling evidence for reality being different than I'd been told, because it seemed to me that when different people from different cultures and time periods somehow had a glimpse beyond the veil of the physical, what they glimpsed was too similar to just be explained away.
One of the things, well, the thing that motivated our talk was what Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, originally called synchronicities, which you call conjunctions of meaningfully parallel events, and you have a more articulate, more formal definition of that. You have experienced synchronicities yourself your whole life, right? Could you share some of those experiences with us?
We were contemplating embarking on a particular publishing project. My future wife was part of that discussion, who's my wife now, and she had gotten inner guidance that was very striking. And in her inner guidance, which she shared, in her inner guidance, she saw us forming what she called a chain gang. But it's not actually a chain gang. It's I realized in the meeting, it's what you call a bucket brigade. You're passing the buckets of water along a chain of people. And what her guidance was that we needed to form a bucket brigade for the sake of this publishing project. And right while we're talking about this, we heard in an adjacent room this sound of like water pouring. We found that there was a line of water cascading through the ceiling. And the only thing to do was right next to where the water is pouring through in this line was a big stack of plastic buckets. And so the only thing we could do was sort of line up this stack of plastic buckets in a line to catch this falling water.
I can imagine that a skeptic at this point would say, well, you know, the human brain's wired to recognize patterns. That's what we evolved to do for survival reasons. So we will see patterns everywhere. We will see faces in the clouds.
I personally think that most of what we call synchronicities, I think is just that. I think it's us seeing patterns, connecting dots that aren't really connected. The mind has two mistakes that can be made here. One mistake is to see patterns where there really aren't any. And we know the mind can do that. But the mind can also make the other mistake, which is to dismiss patterns that are really there. And we know the mind can do that. There's all kinds of, in the history of science, there are all kinds of things where people said, oh, that's not a real pattern. And it was. So I think to be vigilant for only one mistake is to leave the door wide open to the other mistake, whichever side you're on.
How do you see then synchronicities, CMPEs, ontologically? What do you think it is? It's not causality, but it's empirical.
Over time, I think the feeling is inescapable that it's like something is trying to tell you things. Something, someone, there's no signature. But
an intelligence.
Something intelligent, because it looks like this thing has like your interests in mind and is trying to get you to go places that are in your best interests.
Do you think it is us doing this through means that we haven't yet discovered? Or is it being done to us?
That's a really great question. And I think that's probably the question. My main thought was, well, I think it must be something in my unconscious that I'm not in touch with that knows things useful for me and somehow can pattern events in my life to communicate those things. And over time, I drifted away from that. if we're part of one situation, I can have a CMPE and you can have one, and they can be uncannily coordinated. So it seems like this comes from something that transcends the individual, and it may be a kind of a collective unconscious.
If it is us, then this us somehow overlaps with empirical reality, because synchronicities are happening in empirical reality. And the question it then raises is, what is the relationship between our unconscious, maybe our collective unconscious, and empirical reality?
I started thinking in terms of, well, there's something in my unconscious that's in touch with the plan for my life, because there clearly was a plan based on what these CMPEs communicated. And as I did that, I started having CMPEs that basically said, this is God's plan and this is God.
So you see that agency as the divinity itself?
I do, and it's really because they pushed me in that direction again and again over the years.
In what way do you intuit that a divine agency influencing the empirical world through causal means differs from a collective unconscious that influences reality, because it actually is the agency that generates reality as a dream?
I would see God as more of the sort of the parent or source agency in relation to the collective unconscious.
In other words, the collective unconscious is not the mind of God. It is something that is created by God.
Yes. I mean, we're getting into sort of my own personal spiritual beliefs, because I don't know if you can ferret this out from CMPEs. But yes, that's what I believe, that there is a kind of paradoxical second and first person relationship there.
Second and first person at the same time.
Yeah, I think on that level, some of our distinctions kind of break down.
I was always thinking, if in the beginning there was only the Word, if there was only God and God created the world, where were the raw materials? Because the raw materials would have to be created, and then it immediately raises the question, what were the raw materials to create the raw materials? So you have an infinite regress, and you end up with the logical necessity that the raw material was the divinity itself. That was my juvenile thinking about this, which brings up again the first and second person contradiction immediately, because it is a creation, so it's a second person relationship, but it's created out of the agent of creation, so it's a first person relationship as well at the same time. Robert, what do you think synchronicities, CMPEs, signs, what do you think they are trying to teach us?
They also will deal with major life decisions. If you have an interest in the nature of reality, they'll deal with that. They'll deal with things that you need to work on in your character. Relate anything and everything of importance in human life, my experiences, they will deal with.
So the world, life itself, empirical life, is constantly trying to tell us something. It is a puzzle to be decoded in a way.
They seem designed as communications that take an interest in our welfare and that try to push us in certain directions for our welfare.
How can you tune ourselves, Robert, to pay attention to it, to be sensitive to it, to see it, and not allow it to just, pass us by?
That's a very relevant question. I do think the overwhelming majority of them pass us by. You have to be sensitive to what I call the huh, that's weird reaction.
If we were all able to see the CMPs, if we developed this ability as a species to see the metaphors and pay attention to their meanings, how do you think that would change our lives, our future, our society?
I think it would change everything. Everything. You live your life differently when that's the case. You're thinking, okay, there's a plan for things, and these events can help me get in touch with that plan. and it does shape things quite profoundly.